This is Elena Reve, field reporter for Channel 15. I'm here at Riverside Cemetery to interview some of Sunderland's oldest residents. So old, in fact, that they've been deceased for quite some time. Fortunately for us, their ghosts have come back to tell the residents of Sunderland Present just what it was like when the town was first being formed. Here we have Deacon Joseph Field, who died in 1754. Deacon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I come from a long line of family members who were productive in a number of ways. One in research. My great-great-great-grandfather was an astronomer, and he actually found enough information in the research he did to support Copernicus in the idea that the sun did not go around the earth, but the earth went around the sun. And for that, he could have been burned at the stake. But he was not, and became a great landowner in England. We all supported the church and the King of England, but when we, in a very early stage, came over to the United States, what was a new country, we broke away from those concepts, the same as the England broke away from Catholicism. We broke away from the Episcopal Church, the Church of England, and all became Congregationalists, which actually, as you start to think about it, was the seed for a democracy. People in participation and involvement in the running of, as opposed to accepting the rule of the land. In fact, this piece of property, the cemetery, was our first project in what was Swampfield at that time, but now Sunderland. And this cemetery, this plot, was the first project that we involved ourselves in. No matter what happens, people pass away, and you have to take care of them. And so the first project for almost any community as it evolved was the local cemetery. Then we drew lots to find out who among our members, and that numbered 39 in all, two of us, my father and myself, to establish the town of Swampfield. We came from Hatfield. I was born in Hatfield, and we also developed Whately, and prior to that, Northampton, and prior to that, Hartford. So the family has a long history of being involved in the establishment of communities here in Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. My home actually is, my lot was the one up on North Main Street. And if you look at the cotton ball tree, the sycamore, which is one of our landmarks, the house right next door, the yellow house, wasn't actually here, but that's the property that I drew. All my property went from Main Street to the river. And all of the pieces of property, all the lots on this side, were from Main Street to the river. My father drew the lot across the street and on South Main Street instead of North Main Street. All the property there, all the same width, about 660 feet, 40 rods, went from Main Street back to North Silver Street. And so we had our home on the street, and then all of our farming for our produce was from there back, that full distance. That land right now is about, that piece of property is about a third the size of it was when I had it. And right now it's about 5 acres. So if we say a third, it was probably around 15 acres that I had back in my day.
Wow, you have a really rich history with the town, and you've done a lot for it. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Not at all.
I guess the dead do have a lot to say.
Visitors today. My name is Elizabeth Combs Graves. I was one of the first people to come to Swampfield in 1715. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I was born in 1694. Oh goodness, I'm getting old. That was over 300 years ago. My family lived in Northampton, and my father was a fuller. Do you know what a fuller is? A fuller is someone who shrinks and thickens wool by heating, washing, and pressing it. This was a fairly prosperous business, and pretty soon I had brothers and sisters. Does anyone here have brothers and sisters? Do you like them? I had 12 of them. I was the eldest of 13 children. In 1713, my father wanted to move to Springfield. I wasn't too keen on this idea. I had friends, and I was 19. It was about time for me to get married. There were several suitable young men, but one in particular caught my eye. John Graves. Eventually he proposed to me, and June 17th, 1715, we got married. Not so long after that, we moved to Swampfield with 39 other families. When we went to draw lots for our houses, I got a lot right next to my mother-in-law. Just my luck. We moved to Swampfield. There was nothing here except log cabins. Everyone was so busy. The men were cutting wood for houses, barns, building sawmills, while the women, like myself, were spinning wool and stocking root cellars. There are many houses that are still standing. My husband's cousin, Isaac, his house is still standing. It's 168 North Main Street. Now, enough about the town. Let me tell you about my family. I have two very precious young men. My first son, Jonathan, was born at my parents' house because there were no midwives in Swampfield, and you need a midwife. So I had him there, but sadly he died shortly after birth. My second son, Xavier, was Ebenezer, 300 years. All goes in one ear out the other. My second son, Xavier, he was the very first child ever born in Swampfield. Very proud of him. He was a bachelor for most of his life. He got married when he was 73. Wow. Needless to say, I have no direct descendants. Although I am not without family. In this graveyard alone, there are 85 graves, not graves, here. So I get visited quite a lot, especially by my mother-in-law. Not complaining.
Welcome to class. I am Miss Hopper, and I am thrilled to have an audience again. I welcome you to my class, and I'm so thrilled to see all these eager students and ready to embrace Shakespeare. I'm especially glad to see women and girls here, for I have dedicated my life to my own education and that of the students in my classes and at my lectures. Well, let me tell you a little of my history. I'm the only child of Henry Hopper and Caroline Bennett. My father served in the Civil War, and this is the plaque to amplify that. He was in the 21st Regiment Company K, Massachusetts Volunteers. He was 14 years old when he entered the Civil War, and 19 when his tour of duty had completed. I attended grammar school at the Girls Latin School in Boston. From there, I went on to Radcliffe and received my master's degree in 1898. My parents moved to Sunderland while I was away at school. They bought the house at 37 South Main Street, which is right on the other side of that cornfield. After Radcliffe, I went to Bryn Mawr in Philadelphia. There, I taught classes and completed my degree of a doctorate of philosophy. I devoted my life to academics and never married. My first formal teaching position was in Cambridge at the Gilman School, and then in 1907, I accepted a position at Mount Holyoke College as Associate Professor of English Literature. Besides teaching college classes, I had quite a career as a lecturer and an interpreter of English and American literature. One of my greatest loves was acting. I so enjoyed performing in public, doing readings of plays and poetry. As advisor to the drama club, My students brought many pieces of literature to life, and I urge all of you to support and attend your local school and community performances and productions. Well now, let me read to you from one of my favorite prose from, of course, William Shakespeare. Over hill, over dale, through bush, through briar, over park, over pale, through flood, through fire, I do wander everywhere, swifter than the moon's sphere, and I serve the fairy queen, to do her orbs upon the green. The cowslips tall, her pensioners be, in their gold coats spots you see. Those be rubies, fairy favors. In these freckles live their savors. I must go, seek some dewdrops here, and hang a pearl in every cowslip's ear. Class dismissed.
They may be dead, but they sure have stories to tell. I'm here with Carrie Anna Harper, PhD, who died in 1919. Now, one of the prominent authors of today, J.K. Rowling, has written some books about a boy named Harry Potter. Have you heard of these? What do you think of them?
Well, I don't think they'd be quite at the level of Shakespeare. However, I myself wrote a play called The Beau's Comedy, and it is set in Sunderland. So that might be something that the young people today could be interested in.
All right, thank you very much. Here we have Dr. C.G. Trow, who died in 1910. Now, what does C.G. stand for?
Cornelius Gilman.
You seem a little young to be a doctor.
Well, when they said I could come back, I wanted to come back in the best years of my life, and that was in college times.
What actually led to your demise?
But to my demise, I died of a form of pneumonia. I had flu in my lungs. I was around my 80s, so I think, I want to say I led a good life.
He did lead a full life. There are just some things that doctors can't cure.
Alright, good afternoon, folks. My name is Dr. C.G. Trow, but you can call me Doc, everyone in town does. I was the Sunderland town doctor for 38 years. My father was a town doctor before me, and 3 of my uncles are doctors as well. I come from a medical family. I am a practitioner of allopathic medicine. That means modern medicine today. Back in my time, the whole medical community was in a bit of a disarray. There was homeopathy, hydropathy, herbalism, various elixirs you can buy from peddling quacks across the nation. Please avoid those. Fortunately, Massachusetts is not a quack state. We have one of the most advanced medical societies in the country. My father and uncle are both members of the Massachusetts Medical Society, actually. I was born in 1847. I attended the Williston East Hampton School. I graduated from Amherst College in 1870, and then from Columbia University in 1872. Upon graduation, I moved back to Sunderland, married Ginevra Shaw of the Shaw family of Maine. They owned the Shaw grocery chain, if you know it, it's still around today. And then I started medical practice in South Deerfield. I served the patients of Sunderland, South Deerfield, and Whately. As you may recall, back in my day, doctors did house calls. Very convenient. Speaking of house calls, I must tell you about one of the most amazing and traumatic experiences in my life. I was answering a house call in the evening of December 1876. When I was crossing the Sunderland Bridge, a hurricane of a wind came and blew the bridge over. I was in the 3rd tier right in the middle of it, and I went down with the bridge. I survived. I landed amongst the rubble of the wooden bridge. My horse and carriage were rescued the next day. I was rescued that evening. And the Sunderland Bridge Company decided, after 7 bridges collapsing, that was enough. They gave the responsibility of a bridge to the county of Franklin, and the first bridge built out of iron ore was built here. What else? Let's see. I was a member of the school board for 25 years. I was a trustee at the Graves Memorial Library. During my time, many technological advances happened in our town. I was the first person in town to own a telephone that connected my home with my office. In 1897, when the Sunderland Phone Company was formed, I was given the opportunity to call long distance. That referred to any place outside of the town switchboard. Also in my time, electricity came to the town. I didn't trust it then, and I don't trust it now. I stuck with gas, and Yeah, the line only reached a couple houses up the street from me, so I really didn't have the opportunity to use it, but I still don't trust it. A few years after I died, I think around 1912, it became a common household thing, and it became a stable utility. I was independent in politics, and I love bow ties.
Walking through the cemetery and reading all the inscriptions, we've only seen a taste today of what stories these graves have to tell, and what many secrets they hold.
So welcome, brothers and sisters and members of the congregation. I'm the spirit of the Reverend Joseph Ashley. I was the third minister in Sunderland. I was born in 1709, and I passed away in 1797. 97 is 210 years ago, you know. And I lived 88 years. That's long for anybody in that period of time. You know, I lived in the same time period as another person you may still know of. He was born in Boston in 1706 and died in Philadelphia in 1790. And he was known for being a printer and a writer and a scientist. And would you know of this person still, who I'm talking of? Dr. Franklin. Dr. Benjamin Franklin lived in almost exactly the same time period that I did. But let me tell you about myself, you know. I was born in Westfield, and I had 5 brothers and I had 5 sisters. And my family sent me down the river to New Haven to study to be a minister. I went to Yale. And upon completing my studies, I started a ministry in Winchester, New Hampshire, a very teeny little town. But unfortunately, the town was so small that it wasn't safe, and it eventually closed. And I became the minister in Sunderland in 1747. And I lived here 50 more years. And I preached in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And I kept preaching and preaching until I got old, you know. And I was well respected for my preaching. But we did have a problem with my position, and it was my salary. It turns out that in those days in the colonies, there was a problem with deflation of the currency. Now, I was paid in firewood, and I was paid in farm produce related to the currency. And each year, a committee of the town would decide how much to pay the minister. And each year, I got less and less and less. And then there was another problem with my ministry, and that I was a Tory. And a Tory was in favor of staying with England. It wasn't in favor of this revolution that was beginning around here, you know. And now the government was collecting more and more taxes to pay for the army and for the fight with England. But I didn't go for the fight, so I decided not to pay all my taxes. Why should I pay taxes for a war I'm not in favor of? And now the town government, when they decided to pay me my salary, decided not to pay me so much because I wasn't paying my taxes. So in the 70s and 80s, I began to find out I was paid even less and less. And then when the peace treaty was signed in 1783, and then 1784 came, I was 76 years old, and I decided it was time to do something about this. So I did what maybe you do today. I decided to get a lawyer and go to court. And we went to court in Springfield, and God, of course, being on my side, we won, and the town was ordered to pay me my back salaries. But the town didn't want to pay my salary. So even though I won a court battle, I didn't get my benefit. So I decided it was time to negotiate. So we talked and talked, and in December 1783, we came to an agreement. I would get 1 year advance salary, and I would get firewood for life if I moved out of the minister's house and I stopped preaching. And so I did this. And I was minister emeritus for my rest of my years until 88 years old.
Now, tell me something about your interesting gravestone. I notice it's not like the others around here.
Well, it's a gravestone fitting of remembering an honored person in town, like a minister. So ministers got something like this. And it has some wonderful ideas on it. It represents me as being, and let me remember what they said, because it's hard to read the writing after 210 years, you know. It says, sound in judgment, meek in spirit, exemplary in life, a friend of peace, a steady believer in the doctrine of grace, and I was respected by my people and esteemed by the ministry. So glad I'm remembered that way. Sort of a nice nice remembrance for a minister that spent 50 years here.
Very nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Good to see you all after 100 years. You get a little lonely, but so I welcome you to my final resting place. I'm Israel Childs. I live here in Sunderland, but I didn't always live here. I used to live over in Deerfield among the rich uppity folks on the other side of the river. I was born 1824. By the time I got to be 21, I found life a little stifling in Deerfield, so I went west to the Western Reserves, west across the Appalachians, went by Erie Canal, the rail, and landed in some former Indian lands, a place called Indiana, which means the land of the Indians.
I'm now with Israel Childs, who died in 1904. What was it like growing up in the town of Sunderland?
Actually, boring, except for some excitement during the Civil War or the war between the states, as you say. But basically it was work, drudge, boring.
And I heard that you went on to do some adventuring. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, that was kind of fun. I went off to the Western Reserve first. That's over in Ohio, Indiana area, and then I heard about their discovering gold in California. So that was for me. But I had to take a sailing ship. 5 months sailing around Cape Horn. It was terrible. I was seasick most of the time, but got to San Francisco okay. Didn't find much gold, but it was fun.
And did you come home after that?
Yes, I did. Came back to this area, met a wonderful woman, and we got married. Bought some property right here in Sunderland. House, maybe you could see it from here. The cellar flooded from time to time. Sunderland used to be called Swampfield, very appropriate, but it was a good life. It was farmhouse, acreage behind, grew onions, potatoes, stuff like that.
Would you say many other people from Massachusetts went off to the gold rush?
Never met anyone else, only, but we were all over, maybe one or two from Massachusetts. Mostly from the areas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, that area. Some from the South, but mostly what we would call Midwesterners, perhaps, today.
Very nice. You may have been to the gold rush, but I didn't notice any gold fillings.
And I'm William Delano. I'd like to thank you for stopping by today. I was born in Marshfield, Massachusetts in 1770. In 1778, my father moved the family to Sunderland. Prior to being Sunderland, it was affectionately known as Swampfield. I'm not sure of the connection moving from marshes to swamps, but I was raised in the old parsonage. That parsonage is currently depicted on our town seal. That parsonage was the oldest home in town until 1904, when it burned to the ground. To add insult to injury, it's currently under Route 116. We moved to that house after a negotiation with the fine Reverend Ashley. As part of that negotiation, our family and his family traded homes. In 1797, I met and fell in love with Lucretia Hubbard. We were married, had 9 children, all survived. Lucretia passed in 1831, and I subsequently married her sister, Dorothy, in the same year. Dorothy and I had 3 children, 1 survived. My brother Charles and I, in 1798, decided that farming after having homesteaded the house from my father after passing, was not as lucrative as our ambitions. So we started a hat and saddle business. We were able to secure in town pelts that were tanned at Mr. Henderson's tannery, of which there were 2 in town. There's plenty of water as we were draining the town, no trouble. And the raw materials for our hats, rather, were silk, or in the case of fur hats, were beaver, muskrat, or woodchuck, of which I understand there are still plenty. Our business grew and grew well. We were able to export our saddlery products as far west as Ohio, and many of our hats were sent to New York City to a commissioned salesman, not what we have currently with retail. There were commissioners, and we sent them raw materials, and they sold those materials and kept a percentage of that. Our business grew well enough that our factory, which was located adjacent our home, what is now currently the center of this town in a boarded up red and white building, moved to Danbury, Connecticut. We had to move to Danbury, Connecticut for 2 reasons: volume and the skill of the craft. Danbury at that time was known as the hat capital of the world. That prospered, and we did very well for ourselves. In 1815, I was bestowed maybe the best honor as being the first postman in Sunderland. And I was appointed as the first postmaster by our 4th president. Care to guess? Mr. Madison. Mr. Madison appointed a variety of postmasters throughout as the postal service grew, and the post office was located on the north side of my home. I neatly organized all of correspondence at a large table, and people could stop by and get them. Needless to say, it became very busy. As an aside, a short aside, on that same entry, I had the only thermometer in town. So as you picked up your mail, you could check the temperature. I suspect most knew inherently, but you could check.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your occupation? Any wife? Kids? Were you a man? Cat got his tongue. I'm here with Martha Warner Montague, who died in 1876. Martha, tell me what it's like coming back from the grave.
It's very exciting. It's so wonderful people have come to see me, and I've seen all my family. My daughter, Juliet, left for Hawaii, and she is still there. Now I'm with Charles and Fanny, and my husband Caleb, who died when I was 25, and now I'm joined with him, which I'm all excited about that.
That's very nice. Can you tell us a little bit about your sailing cloth business?
It was very profitable. My sister and I did a lot of sailing cloths for a company in Northampton. We made enough money to go to Deerfield Academy. We went it was 4 quarters, and we went for 3 quarters, which was only $202 per quarter. And if we wanted to have extra classes, it was $2.50. So with all the money that we made, we bought the first dictionary that the town of Sunderland had, and we had a great life.
Were there many women going to Deerfield Academy?
Not too many, no.
So you were sort of a pioneer?
Right, I was a pioneer. And that was when Deerfield Academy just was founded.
I was very busy bringing up my children, never lost sight of the people. When the epidemic broke out, I sent my children to other towns. I sent them to other towns, and I stayed in town taking care of sickly families for months. Harley died at the age of 31, and then upon Juliet's death, August 11, 1896, her children, my grandchildren, donated $1,000 to Graves Library. Can you imagine in those years how much money that was? And so getting along in years, I went to live with Charles, and Charles lived in the Berkshires. In fact, Charles was the founder and the
editor of the Berkshire Eagle, which is now in print. Shortly after that, Charles left me to stay in Boston, so I went to live with my daughter Fanny in Baltimore, Maryland. Failing health, I died March 13, 1876 at the age of 92. Wow. Can you imagine what happened? These men died young and the women lived to be 92. My body was brought to the South Deerfield by train and then to horse-drawn hearse to the Riverside Cemetery, where I lay with my beloved Caleb and my children. This is Martha. And you see, he died at 44. Was I a rough life? And my poor little James died at 21 months. I think this is Harley. I think he died from the typhoid. That took a lot of people way back then. It was bad. I'm glad you stopped by.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Well, you were quite the pioneer. I've never hugged a pioneer before.
This is always the first time.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I'm here with Major Caleb Hubbard, who died in 1850. He was quite the military man. Would you tell us a little about your service?
Well, I was at Bunker Hill. I was at Ticonderoga. I came out unscathed. I'm happy for that. When I returned, I was 23 years old, and I took over my father's tavern, the old Hubbard Tavern, located near the corner of 116 and the Plum Trees. Plum Trees Road is the road there. And I had a very good time.
Was the business successful?
Highly successful. In fact, most taverns back in those days were highly successful because everybody drank, and that included children. At the beginning, they didn't trust the water because that was their culture. They came from England, Holland, Germany. Nobody over there drank the water. It was so polluted that they drank beer, ale, cider, and later rum and wines there. When they came here, they were afraid of the water. The water was fine. The Indians were drinking it, but it was their culture, and they liked it. So I kept drinking. It was highly successful. Now, at the Hubbard Tavern, he was a great storyteller. He had a great sense of humor, and everybody wanted to hear all about his stories. And I'm sure there were a lot of jokes told then. And who knows what flavor they were, if you know what I mean. If it was an all-male audience, well, probably a lot of them were scatological, and they had to clean it up when the ladies came in. But it was very successful. When his son took over, when he died at age 96, he continued the business. And then his grandson, Ashley, converted it into an inn at the time and got another license. And that inn lasted up until 1836. The business was very good. Now, you might ask me, what's the difference between a tavern and an inn? Well, a tavern was where they went to drink and talk and pick up the latest news. Your taverns were your communication center in those days. Think back, you didn't have a telephone or radio. You didn't have Channel 15, right? No TV, no internet, and at the beginning, no newspapers. How do you think the people in Sunderland found out what was happening in the outside world? To them, Boston was the outside world. From you, the travelers, the stagecoaches, when they arrived, they always stopped at a tavern to rest. Remember, you didn't have blacktop roads, macadam, and things like that. So they stopped at a tavern, or an ordinary. That's the old English word. They were called ordinaries. Well, the locals that are there would pump information. Where are you from? When did you leave there? What's happening? And that's how they knew what was happening in the outside world. And then they told somebody else. If you carried a newspaper, there were very few newspapers. Could be a month old. They don't care. That's news to them. And many times the tavern keeper would buy a few drinks to you if you had brought in a newspaper and take that newspaper and pin it on the wall. So when other people came in, they read the news.
You must have met a lot of interesting people.
Oh, yes, an awful lot, right? One day I was out there with our team of oxen and my horse, and all of a sudden somebody came running up to tell me that there's trouble in Lexington. A shot was fired. No longer was there just talking going on, but shots were fired. And a guy by the name of Longfellow once remarked in one of his poems, it was the shot heard around the world, the start of the American Revolution. Well, I had just joined the militia. I was 20 years old at the time. So I jumped on my horse and ran into the center of town where you probably just came from to spread the word. There were other of my buddies, militiamen, and we decided we better help out. We all got our horses, rode to Belchertown, and from there rode to Cambridge. Some people had dubbed us the Minutemen. I was a Minuteman. I fought at Ticonderoga and at Cambridge and at Bunker Hill. I was very fortunate. I came away unscathed. I stayed with the military until I rose to the rank of a major. And I'm very happy to say that most people for the rest of my life always called me Major Caleb Hubbard. I left the military, returned home, and took over my father's tavern business. There I met a young lady by the name of Tryphena Montague, and we got married. She bore me 4 lovely children. She also helped me in running the tavern. I became a magistrate also, made some extra money, and I was involved in civic affairs, but most of the fun as a magistrate was marrying people. A lot of the young people that got married would have their receptions in our ball at their times. Women really ran the taverns, as my wife did. I wasn't there most of the time. I had my other job. I got the license. She ran the tavern.
Well, I hope this gave you a little taste of what a ghost's life is actually like. Interesting, isn't it?
I'd like just to say a few words that I really appreciate all the help and support that I got from the Historical Commission and from the Swampfield Historical Society in putting this production together. And we could not have done this if it hadn't been for the local cultural grant that we got from the Sunderland Cultural Council.